Object permanence is the cognitive capacity to track the presence of an object that is obscured from or outside the subject's field of view. In plain English, it means the ability to realize that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it has ceased to exist. Humans are famously not born with this ability. This is why infants are so thrilled by a simple game of peekaboo. When you cover your face right in front of them, they have no idea where it went. Now, scientists aren't entirely certain when humans develop object permanence, but I can very confidently tell you when they lose it, and that is when they become writers. Hi, my name is Jerry, I'm a fantasy author, and in this short series of videos, I'm trying to give you as much advice as I can about how to write better descriptions for your narratives. So stop me if you've heard this one. You just started reading a new chapter in a story. The author sets the scene, describes the surroundings, and then moves on to dialogue. Opinions clash, emotions are expressed, secrets are revealed, the drama is running high, and then suddenly one of the characters is swept overboard by a huge wave because, oh, that's right, they're on a boat, in a storm, in the middle of the ocean. Now, admittedly, this is something of an exaggerated example, but honestly not by that much. The importance of setting the scene is widely discussed and understood. Chiefly, it helps you prevent a problem known as white void syndrome, where in the absence of any description of the scenery before going to action, your reader is essentially forced to picture your characters as floating in this nondescript blank emptiness. What sometimes falls by the wayside is that while setting the scene is important, it is unfortunately not enough. If you don't make the effort to keep the scene alive in the reader's mind, eventually all those lovely details that you described at the beginning will gradually fade away from their memory and your characters will drift back into the white void. This is where object permanence comes in. Basically, all you need to do is pick out a few of the things that you describe in the beginning and then just occasionally have your characters interact with them as the scene unfolds. Besides helping your novel read like an actual novel instead of a chat log with occasional dialogue tags, this simple technique has a number of additional benefits. One of them being helping you control the flow and pacing of your scene. Dialogues tend to be pretty heavy on information. Usually that's the whole point. People learn new things by communicating with each other. And because of this density of information, your reader is occasionally going to need a moment to pause and reflect on what has been said so far. And these little moments of your characters interacting with their surroundings provide the perfect excuse. In fact, without them, you run the risk of your reader having to forcibly tear themselves out of your narrative to go, wait, so what's going on? Which not only brings the scene to a grinding halt, but also breaks the immersion of your narrative and that all-important interiority. Understanding how these little moments contribute to the flow and pacing of your scene also allows you to be a lot more efficient in deciding when and where to include them, because there's definitely a way to go overboard with these little interactions. You do not need to shoehorn one after every single line of dialogue. That is just comically bad. Instead, look for the moments when there's a lull in the conversation or maybe a shift in topic and insert your breakpoints there. Usually your characters themselves will also need a moment to kind of make up their minds about how they feel about what's being discussed. Another advantage of including these moments of interaction is that not only does it maintain, but actually deepens the immersion of your scene. If you've seen the second video of this series, where I talk about the inherent intimacy of the senses, then you might remember me saying that if you only provide visual details when you describe a character, it'll feel like looking at a photograph rather than being in the presence of a human. And that applies to scenery as well. You can include all the gorgeous detail you want when you're setting the scene. If you're just gonna completely ignore all of that for the rest of the chapter, it's basically gonna feel like your characters are standing in front of a richly painted but flat canvas. Including just a few of these instances where your characters interact with their surroundings goes a long way in making it feel like an actual three-dimensional space. Now, one aspect of object permanence you'll need to pay attention to is consistency. For example, if your character puts their glass on a table and then 2 lines later they take a swig, or if they're shown holding a big box with 2 hands and then they're giving someone a high five, that can be a little bit confusing for your reader. Now, granted, you do have some margin here depending on the context of the scene as well as your phrasing. For example, if you make it clear that your character only sets their glass down temporarily while they do something else, then it can be understood that they picked the glass up again after they were done doing that thing. And similarly, if the broader context of the scene is that your characters are loading boxes into a truck, then it can be implied that in between picking up the box and giving someone a high five, they put it in the truck with the others. Basically, as long as you keep track of the scene in your own head as you're writing it, you'll probably be able to tell what details to include. There's something of a trope/saying among writers, which is that talking is a free action. The expression comes from tabletop gaming, where it is a fundamental rule that as long as the characters are in the same space, players are free to speak between themselves as much as they want, even if they're in the middle of a chaotic battle. The way this relates to writing is that the moment your characters become locked in conversation, time around them basically comes to a halt. For example, if your characters are walking through the city and they strike up a conversation just as they step off the sidewalk, you could have 5 or 6 pages of full dialogue, and as far as your reader is concerned, all of that takes place on the crosswalk. It's basically like that endlessly memed scene from the Fast and the Furious with the infinite runway. Your reader isn't going to be able to intuitively keep track of time. It is entirely your responsibility as the writer to make time move forward, and including these breakpoints in the dialogue is how you do it. Now, up until this point, we have only spoken about object permanence in the context of a single scene. However, it can also apply across chapters, or, if you're writing a series, even across books. More often than not, your characters will revisit at least some of the locations they encountered through the story, and in these cases, it can be really beneficial to repeatedly mention certain memorable features of those locations. For one, it is a convenient reminder for your reader that this is a place they already know, and then on top of that, it is a great opportunity for some subtle world building and some subtle characterization. If you thought you could last an entire video without me repeating the first rule of interiority, then you were wrong, so you might as well say it with me. What you describe is what your character perceives, and the way you describe it is the way the character perceives it. In this case, by simply choosing to repeatedly describe a certain element of a location, you can give a hint to your reader as to what is it that your character is paying attention to, what is it that they always notice, and how do they feel about it. And as always, it doesn't have to be visual. In the fictional city of New Montrose, where my series takes place, there's an industrial district called the Wedge, and every single time one of my characters has to go there, I never fail to mention that this place stinks to high heaven. And you can actually take this one step further if you have multiple POV characters, in which case you can describe the same location from one point of view in one chapter and a different point of view in a different chapter, highlighting the ways in which those descriptions are similar or different. Again, to take an example from my own writing, in my latest book, both of the main characters, Corliss and Tessa, visit the same bedroom at different points in the story and under different circumstances. Now, in the first of these instances, our POV character is Corliss, who is not a very sentimental person and also in something of a hurry, so when he looks in the corner and sees a cabinet full of knickknacks and tchotchkes and souvenirs, he basically goes, okay, that's useless, what else is here? By contrast, when Tessa visits the same room at a later point and with more time on her hands, she's immediately drawn to that same cabinet, not because the things in it are pretty, but because to her, those things tell the story of the person who lives there, and that's what she's interested in. And with that, this short series about descriptions is now coming to a close for the time being. If you think there's something in either this video or the previous ones that I should have talked about or should have talked more about, by all means, leave it in the comments. I would love to read them. I will be back later with a different video about a different topic, and until then, stay tuned.